The basketball slammed against the driveway with a sharp echo, bouncing high before crashing through the rim. Caleb Rivers caught it on the rebound, breath steady, sweat running down his temple. The sound carried down the quiet street like a drumbeat, steady, unstoppable, alive. To him, it was freedom. To Howard Briggs, the HOA president watching from across the street, it was a provocation. "That's enough!" The shout cracked through the warm afternoon air, startling a bird from the maple tree above. Caleb froze mid-dribble, the leather gripped tight in his hands. He looked up and saw Briggs marching across the street, clipboard tucked under his arm, polished loafers snapping against the pavement. The man's scowl was etched deep into his face, his pen already poised like a weapon. "This isn't a park," Briggs barked, stabbing the pen toward the hoop. "This neighborhood has rules. That junk comes down. Today." Caleb tightened his hold on the ball. His chest rose and fell quickly, though he tried not to show it. He wasn't a rule breaker. He wasn't loud or disrespectful or reckless. He was just a kid playing in his own driveway. "It's just a hoop," Caleb said, his voice steady though his stomach knotted. "I'm not hurting anyone." Briggs scoffed, shaking his head. "Not hurting anyone? Do you know what that eyesore does to property values? Do you know how many complaints I've gotten about the noise?" His words came fast, clipped, rehearsed. "This is a community, boy. Communities are built on order, and your driveway circus isn't part of it." Caleb's throat tightened. "Boy," the way Briggs said it felt heavier than the word itself. He lifted his chin, refusing to drop his gaze. "I live here too." Briggs's lips curled into a smirk, as though Caleb had just said the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Living here doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. That's the problem with families like yours. You think the rules don't apply, but I'll make sure they do." The words stung, sharper than the summer heat pressing down on Caleb's skin. He glanced at the house, silently wishing his dad would pull into the driveway. But the street remained quiet, save for Briggs's voice. Across the road, a curtain shifted. A neighbor peeked out, then another. Two kids on bikes slowed at the corner, whispering as they watched. Briggs noticed the eyes gathering and raised his voice higher, projecting like a man on a stage. "This hoop is a violation," he announced, jabbing his clipboard toward Caleb, "and this family will be fined if it's not removed immediately. Those are the rules of the HOA." The declaration echoed off the houses. Caleb felt his cheeks burn hot, not from the sun, but from the shame pressing in. His grip on the basketball faltered, and it slipped, rolling slowly down the drive until it tapped against Briggs's shoe. Briggs gave it a smug kick back, as though even the ball belonged to him. Caleb bent to pick it up, his fingers trembling. The ball had always felt like freedom in his hands. Now, it felt like weight. Briggs leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Caleb could hear. "You'd better get used to disappointment, son. Because if that hoop isn't gone by tonight, I'll make calls that'll have you wishing you never bounced a ball in this neighborhood again." Caleb's heart thudded hard in his chest. Calls. He knew exactly what Briggs meant. The police. Briggs was known for it. Whispering in ears, making phone calls, pulling strings to keep the neighborhood in line. Caleb swallowed hard. "It's my driveway," he whispered. Briggs smiled like a man who'd already won. "Not for long." The ball slipped from Caleb's fingers again, bouncing once, twice, before rolling into the gutter. He didn't chase it this time. He just stood there, shoulders stiff, stomach knotted, every ounce of his teenage pride warring with the sinking humiliation in his chest. And Howard Briggs turned on his heel, clipboard tucked neatly back under his arm, already planning his next move. Because men like him never settled for warnings. They always came back for more. Howard Briggs's polished shoes clicked back across the street, his smirk fixed in place. Caleb Rivers stood frozen in his driveway, the ball abandoned in the gutter. The warm air felt heavier now, pressing down on him like a weight. His chest ached with the sting of Briggs's words, but more than that, with the fear of what he meant by calls. Briggs wasted no time. He pulled out his phone as he reached the curb, dialing with deliberate slowness, making sure Caleb could see. "Yes, it's me," he said loudly into the receiver, voice pitched for the neighborhood to hear. "We've got a violation. Noise disturbance, unauthorized structure on the property. Yes, I'll need you to send someone right away." He snapped the phone shut and gave Caleb one last satisfied look before disappearing into his pristine white two-story house. Minutes passed. Long, dragging minutes. Caleb shifted from foot to foot, every sound on the street making him flinch. He thought about retreating inside, but something stubborn rooted him in place. This was his home, his hoop. He wasn't going to run. The distant wail of a siren cut through the air. Caleb's stomach dropped. A black and white cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac, sunlight glinting off its hood. The siren died, but the red and blue lights kept flashing, painting the houses in restless color. The cruiser slowed, then stopped right in front of Caleb's driveway. Two officers stepped out. The first was Officer Grant Walters, tall, broad-shouldered, and smug. He adjusted his belt with deliberate flair, the metal of his baton catching the light. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. He was the kind of cop who enjoyed being seen, enjoyed the weight of authority, and he enjoyed working hand in hand with Briggs. The second was Officer Kyle Mercer, younger, quieter, following half a step behind. His eyes flickered nervously between Caleb and the gathering neighbors, but he said nothing. Briggs reemerged from his house just in time, walking across the street as if he were leading the cavalry. "Officers?" "Right on time," he said, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "This young man is in violation of HOA code. Loud noise, unsightly structure, total disregard for community standards." Caleb clenched his fists. Loud noise? Unsightly structure? He'd been playing ball in his driveway. That was it. Walters gave a slow nod, his eyes sweeping over the hoop before locking on Caleb. "That your property?" Caleb swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "It's my hoop. I'm just practicing." Walters's smirk deepened. "Practicing? Looks to me like disturbing the peace." He stepped closer, letting his shadow fall over Caleb. "You know, son, in some neighborhoods they take this kind of thing very seriously. Fines, citations, sometimes even confiscation." Confiscation. The word made Caleb's stomach twist. He glanced toward the ball still lying in the gutter. This wasn't just about the hoop. Walters wanted him to feel small. Briggs crossed his arms, standing tall beside the officer. "I've told him once already. He doesn't listen. That's why I called you. Some families need stronger reminders." The words hung in the air, ugly and loaded. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wanted to yell, wanted to demand how bouncing a basketball in his own driveway was a crime, but the weight of two uniforms in front of him stole the words from his throat. Walters leaned in, close enough for Caleb to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You want to make life hard for yourself, son. Keep it up, or you can take that hoop down right now and save everyone the trouble." Behind him, Mercer shifted uneasily, but said nothing. His eyes flicked once to Briggs, then back to the ground. Across the street, more neighbors had gathered. Some held phones, quietly recording. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the cruiser's engine and the distant chirp of a lawn sprinkler. Caleb forced himself to speak, though his voice shook. "It's just a hoop. It's not against the law." Walters chuckled, slow and mean. "The law? Kid, in this neighborhood, the HOA is the law." Briggs grinned at that, pleased with himself. "Exactly. And if this family can't respect that, maybe they don't belong here." The words hit Caleb like a blow. He felt the heat rush to his cheeks, shame and anger mixing in his chest. He wanted to disappear, but he stood rooted in place, basketball gone, dignity slipping. Walters tapped his baton against his palm, casual but threatening. "Last chance. Take it down, or I'll make sure your folks regret it." Caleb's lips parted, but no words came. The sound of his own pulse pounded in his ears. The officers loomed larger, Briggs's smirk wider. The whole block was watching, silent, waiting. And just as Caleb's courage began to crack, the low hum of a familiar car engine cut through the tension. A sleek, black sedan rolled into the cul-de-sac, slowing as it approached the driveway. The neighbors shifted, recognizing it instantly. Caleb's heart leapt. His father was home. The sleek black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the driveway, its engine purring low before going quiet. For Caleb, the sound was like air rushing back into his lungs. His father was home. Relief and dread tangled in his chest all at once. Relief that he wasn't alone anymore, dread that he'd have to explain why the HOA president and 2 uniformed cops were standing in their driveway. The driver's door opened. David Rivers stepped out, tall and composed, still in his navy suit from a day packed with city meetings. His tie was loosened, his jacket draped casually over one arm, but even like this, he carried himself with a calm authority that made people pause. His eyes went first to Caleb, the sweat on his brow, the basketball abandoned in the gutter, the stiffness in his stance. Then his gaze lifted, moving to the 3 men arrayed in front of his son. "Caleb," David said evenly, closing the car door with deliberate calm. "Everything all right here?" Caleb opened his mouth, but Briggs got there first. "Ah, Mr. Rivers," Howard Briggs called, stepping forward with false cheer. "We were just addressing a little violation issue. Your boy here insists on playing with that unsightly basketball hoop. Against community standards, of course. We've already issued a warning, but he's resistant." David's brows rose slightly, though his expression remained neutral. He glanced at the hoop, then back to Briggs. "A violation? For playing basketball in his own driveway?" Before Briggs could answer, Officer Grant Walters stepped in, his tone smug. "This isn't just about a game, sir. We've had noise complaints, and the HOA has rules about exterior structures. If you don't comply, fines can add up quick, maybe even escalate further." He rested his hand on his belt, thumb brushing the baton holstered there. David's gaze flicked to the gesture, then to the younger officer, Kyle Mercer, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Finally, his eyes returned to his son. "Caleb, how long were you out here?" "About an hour, Dad," Caleb said quietly. His throat was tight, but the steadiness in his father's tone gave him courage. "I wasn't being loud. Just practicing." David nodded once. "That's what I thought." He turned fully to Briggs, his voice calm, but carrying enough weight to still the murmurs of the neighbors gathered across the street. "Howard, I've lived here nearly 15 years. Not once have I heard of an ordinance against children playing in their own driveways." Briggs's face tightened. "It's not about ordinances. It's about community standards, and as HOA president, It's my duty to enforce them." David took a step forward, closing the distance until he stood eye to eye with Briggs. His voice dropped lower, but sharper. "Your duty is to represent this community, not harass children with clipboards and threats." The neighbors across the street shifted, their whispers growing. Phones tilted higher, recording every word now. Briggs stiffened. "You don't understand, David. These rules keep property values high. People don't want to live in neighborhoods cluttered with—" He waved a dismissive hand toward the hoop. "Junk like this." David's eyes narrowed. His tone remained calm, but the steel beneath it rang clear. "What people want is safety, respect, community. Not an HOA president who calls the police on a 15-year-old for bouncing a basketball." Officer Walters stepped forward again, clearly bristling at being sidelined. "With respect, sir, it's not your call. The HOA sets the rules here, and we enforce them when necessary." David turned, his gaze locking on Walters. The calm never left his face, but his next words landed heavy. "Actually, officer, it is my call." Walters frowned, caught off guard. Mercer blinked, straightening slightly. Briggs opened his mouth, but David kept going. "You see, I know the city ordinances better than anyone in this neighborhood. And I also know exactly how much authority the HOA really has. Spoiler: it doesn't extend to tearing down a hoop on private property, especially not with police intimidation." The neighbors stirred again, some nodding, some murmuring their agreement. Walters's smirk faltered just a fraction. Briggs, desperate, sputtered. You can't just dismiss the HOA. We have power here." David's eyes cut back to him, cool and unflinching. "Howard, the only power you have is the power your neighbors give you, and from the looks of it," he gestured subtly to the crowd now openly filming, "that power is slipping." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the soft buzz of a phone recording nearby. For Caleb, standing just a step behind his father, the shift was palpable. The humiliation that had weighed heavy on his shoulders minutes before was lifting. His father hadn't raised his voice once, but the balance of power had already begun to tilt. And neither Briggs nor the officers had realized just how much further it was about to fall. The air on Maplewood Lane felt different now. The neighbors across the street stood frozen, phones raised, waiting. Caleb could feel it too, the shift in the atmosphere. His father's calm voice had cut through the arrogance that hung heavy just moments before. Howard Briggs, however, wasn't finished. He puffed out his chest, gripping his clipboard like it was a shield. "Don't twist this, David. This isn't about harassment. This is about standards, rules. If we let one family break them, where does it stop?" David Rivers tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Rules." He let the word hang for a beat. "Do you even know the city ordinance you claim to be enforcing?" Briggs blinked, faltering just slightly. Of course I do. Section 12, regarding exterior structures." He rattled the words out quickly, like a man bluffing a hand of cards. David folded his arms, voice steady. "Section 12 concerns permanent structures, sheds, garages, fences over 6 feet. Not portable equipment like a basketball hoop. You would know that if you actually read the code." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone muttered, "He got him." Briggs's face flushed a dark red. Before he could recover, David turned to Officer Walters. "And you, officer? You said this was a noise complaint?" Walters shifted, his jaw tightening. "That's right. Disturbing the peace." David's eyes narrowed. "Did you measure decibel levels?" Did you take a statement from a single neighbor who actually lives within earshot? Or did you just take Howard's word and show up ready to intimidate a kid? Walters's mouth opened, but no words came. Mercer, the younger officer, glanced at the ground, his discomfort plain. David took a slow step forward, his voice calm but razor-sharp. Because I know the law. And I know the difference between enforcing it and abusing it. What happened here today isn't law enforcement, it's harassment, plain and simple. The crowd stirred again, murmurs louder now, confidence growing behind the man in the suit who stood unshaken. Phones zoomed closer, capturing every word. Howard Briggs sputtered, his hands tightening on his clipboard. You think you can just undermine me like this? I'm the HOA President. I have authority here. David's gaze cut back to him, cool and unflinching. Howard, the HOA can suggest rules. It can levy dues, but it cannot override city ordinances, and it certainly cannot use police intimidation to enforce rules that don't exist. He paused, his voice deepening, which, ironically enough, falls under abuse of power. Briggs's mouth snapped shut. His eyes darted from David to the officers, desperate for backup. Walter shifted his weight, but even he could feel the tide turning. David's next words dropped like a hammer. And if you want to talk about authority, let's be transparent. I'm not just a homeowner, I'm not just Caleb's father. He straightened, his voice carrying with effortless weight. I am the mayor of this city. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The dog walker's jaw dropped. The teens on their bikes shouted, "No way!" Phones whipped higher, recording furiously. Even Officer Mercer's eyes widened, his posture snapping upright as though the truth had jolted him. David let the silence stretch, the revelation sinking deep. Which means I don't just know the ordinances. I write them, I uphold them, and I have the authority to hold anyone accountable who abuses their position, whether that's a neighborhood president or a police officer who forgets who he serves. Briggs's face drained of color. His clipboard slipped slightly in his hand, the papers rattling in the faint breeze. Walters clenched his jaw, trying to mask his unease, but the smirk was gone. Mercer looked like he wanted to disappear altogether. David's voice softened, but the steel remained. You thought you could intimidate my son. You thought a clipboard and a badge would silence him. But you were wrong. What you've done today is expose yourself to this neighborhood, to these witnesses, and to me. The neighbors erupted in low, buzzing agreement. Phones caught every angle. Some clapped, others murmured encouragement. Briggs stood stiff, humiliated, the spotlight he had once craved now searing through him. Caleb, standing behind his father, felt his chest swell. The knot of shame that had twisted inside him since Briggs first shouted across the street was loosening. His father hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even moved more than a few steps. Yet everything had shifted. David turned once more to Briggs, his words final. So let's be clear. That hoop stays, my son plays, and the next time you think about abusing your role, remember, the city is watching, and so am I. The crowd broke into applause. Real applause this time, sharp, confident, undeniable. The sound rang across the block, louder than any bouncing basketball ever had. Howard Briggs lowered his head. For the first time all afternoon, he had nothing to say. Howard Briggs stood frozen, his clipboard drooping in his hand, the bold red flush draining from his face. The crowd's applause still echoed down Maplewood Lane, rolling like thunder across the cul-de-sac. Phones stayed high, neighbors whispering, some laughing under their breath, others shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed. For once, Briggs had no words. Officer Grant Walters shifted uncomfortably beside him, the confidence gone from his stance. His hand no longer rested on his baton, but hung limp at his side. His partner, Officer Kyle Mercer, had stepped back entirely, his eyes downcast, his jaw tight. The uniforms that once carried weight now looked oddly small in the glow of the mayor's presence. David Rivers let the moment stretch, the applause fading into silence. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned not to Briggs or the officers, but to the crowd of neighbors gathered. His voice carried, steady, measured, as though he were speaking not just to them, but to the city itself. "Authority is a responsibility," David said, his gaze sweeping across the faces. "It's not a weapon. It's not a tool for fear. It exists to protect, not to intimidate. When someone forgets that, when they twist it for their own pride or gain, what you get is exactly what we saw here today." The neighbors nodded. A few murmured, "That's right." The dog walker clutched his leash tighter. The man on the porch across the street raised his phone higher, still recording every word. David continued, his tone firm but never raised. "This isn't about a basketball hoop. This is about dignity. A boy should be able to play in his own driveway without being harassed. Families should feel safe in their own homes without being threatened with fines or phony rules. That's not community. That's control." His eyes shifted to Briggs, who flinched at the directness of the gaze. "Howard, you don't build neighborhoods by tearing people down. You build them by lifting people up, by making sure every door feels welcome, every voice feels heard, every child feels safe." Briggs opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The words stuck in his throat, useless against the weight of the truth pressing down. David turned back to the officers. "And law enforcement," he said, his voice sharpening just enough to cut, "is not the errand boy of an HOA president. Your badge represents every citizen in this city, not just the ones who shout the loudest. You serve the people, all the people. Never forget that." Walters's jaw worked, but he stayed silent. Mercer gave a single stiff nod, the shame clear in his eyes. The crowd stirred again, voices louder now. One woman called out, "That's right, Mayor!" Another added, "We stand with you!" Applause rose once more, this time rolling through the block like a tide. Caleb stood just behind his father, eyes wide, chest full. The shame that had weighed on him earlier had lifted completely. Where he had once felt small, he now felt seen, protected. David glanced back at his son, his expression softening just slightly. "And Caleb," he said, voice carrying but warm, "don't you ever let someone make you feel small for doing what you love. That hoop isn't just metal and paint. It's your effort, your joy, your freedom. Don't give that away because someone else can't stand the sound of it." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, Dad," he said, voice low but strong. David turned once more to the street, his final words echoing like a gavel. "This neighborhood doesn't need fear to stay strong. It needs respect, it needs fairness, it needs truth. And as long as I'm here, that's what it will have." The applause this time was thunderous. Neighbors clapped, cheered, even whistled. The teens on their bikes whooped and shouted, "Let him play!" A woman down the block raised her fist high in solidarity. The street that had once been tense with silence was now alive with unity. Howard Briggs shrank back, clutching his useless clipboard, muttering under his breath. He turned, retreating toward his pristine white house with hurried steps. Officer Walters followed stiffly, his shoulders tight, while Mercer lingered just long enough to cast one last look at David before turning away. One by one, the crowd began to disperse, neighbors smiling at Caleb, some patting David on the shoulder as they passed. The tension had broken. What remained was solidarity, a community reminded of its strength, David bent to pick up the basketball from the gutter, dusted it off, and handed it to his son. "Go on," he said quietly, with a hint of a smile. Caleb took the ball, his fingers gripping the familiar grooves. He glanced once at the retreating figures of Briggs and the officers, then back to his father. His chest filled with pride. He dribbled once, twice, then launched the ball into the hoop. The net swished clean. The sound was crisp, clear, and this time, it wasn't just the sound of a game. It was the sound of freedom. The neighbors clapped again, some cheering as the ball fell back into Caleb's hands. The cul-de-sac was alive, not with fear, but with celebration. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the street in golden light, Caleb Rivers played on. This time, without shame. This time, with the whole neighborhood watching, and with dignity intact. Do you love stories like Caleb's? Click the subscribe button and get notified on more stories like this.